When I was 14 years old, Valerie and Halland threw my clothes onto the porch in garbage bags and handed me over to Uncle Eric. They told me I was too stupid to live with my perfect twin sister, Isabella. They signed away their guardianship on the hood of a luxury car and drove away without looking back. 16 years later, right as my sustainable materials company was about to go public, they showed up demanding the Redwood Trust they claimed belonged to my sister. My name is Jessie, and I am 30 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your peace. I sat at the head of a massive reclaimed wood table in a glass-enclosed boardroom overlooking the vibrant San Francisco skyline. The morning sun reflected off the pristine waters of the bay, casting a bright, unforgiving light across the expansive room. The space was filled with elite venture capitalists, high-profile corporate attorneys, and my trusted executive team. We were in the critical final stages of reviewing the paperwork for the initial public offering of my ecological construction materials empire. The atmosphere in the room was electric, heavy with the weight of monumental expectation. Thick binders of legal documents were stacked high across the polished table. The digital projector hummed softly, displaying our final valuation numbers in crisp, glowing blue and green financial charts. We were actively finalizing a $3.5 billion merger that would permanently revolutionize the entire sustainable infrastructure industry. My chief operating officer was walking the skeptical underwriters through our projected growth margins for the next quarter, answering their aggressive financial questions with practiced ease. Projecting calm, absolute authority. I nodded slowly as the lead investment bankers praised our robust, zero-waste distribution network, pouring my blood, sweat, and tears into proving my worth to a world that had written me off was the only path I knew. The last decade and a half had been spent working harder than anyone else, fighting tooth and nail to prove that I belonged in rooms exactly like this one. This moment was the absolute culmination of years of relentless dedication. Countless sleepless nights, and a highly complex vision built entirely from discarded scraps and sheer willpower. Inheriting a single cent of this empire was never part of the equation. It was forged in the fire of absolute rejection. Looking around the silent, attentive room, taking a slow, deep breath of the air-conditioned air, I knew I owned this space. Then, my personal cell phone vibrated violently against the polished wood of the boardroom table. Usually, ignoring all notifications and alerts during critical corporate meetings kept my focus entirely on the legal teams. But my screen lit up with a text message from an unknown number. The preview text caught my eye and forced the breath directly from my lungs. The message read, "Sign over the Redwood Trust right now. We know you are about to go public. We are downstairs in your lobby." Staring at the glowing screen for a long time, the sophisticated chatter of the corporate boardroom faded into a dull, distant buzz. The high-stakes discussion about percentage points and equity distribution became entirely meaningless background noise. For a fraction of a second, the phantom chill of a crisp autumn afternoon threatened to freeze my lungs. But the frightened, discarded teenager shivering on a concrete porch no longer existed. Panic did not set in. The crushing inadequacy that Valerie and Halland had maliciously tried to brand me with all those years ago found no foothold in my mind. Instead, a cold, deeply calculated stillness washed over me. Pressing the intercom button connected me directly to the lobby security desk on the ground floor. Keeping my voice perfectly level, completely devoid of any trembling or emotion, I instructed the head of security to deny them entry, and if they caused a scene, to immediately contact the local authorities. Turning to my executive assistant standing quietly by the heavy double doors, a subtle nod was all it took to activate the boardroom's internal recording system. The Redwood Trust was not just a piece of land. To Valerie and Halland, it was nothing but a barren, overgrown plot of dirt that they foolishly believed they could liquidate for quick cash. They had absolutely no idea that the vast expanse of ancient redwoods and the pristine water rights attached to it were the exclusive, foundational core of my entire supply chain. That specific plot of land was the beating heart of my $3.5 billion valuation. Yielding it to them would not just be a financial loss, it would be the systematic destruction of everything I had built. They thought they could simply walk into my corporate headquarters, drop a vague threat about ruining my public offering, and walk away with a massive payout. They believed the frightened little girl they had thrown away would easily fold under the pressure of their presence. Flipping my phone face down on the table smoothly blocked out their toxic demands, offering a polite, unbothered smile to the lead underwriter. I signaled for the meeting to continue. They had absolutely no idea what they were walking into. I was entirely ready. The evening fog was just beginning to roll over the Golden Gate Bridge when my private driver finally pulled up to my residence. Taking the private elevator up to our penthouse, the subtle hum of the mechanic served as a transition between the ruthless corporate battlefield and my personal sanctuary. The moment the heavy oak doors opened, the faint, comforting scent of baked apples and cinnamon completely erased the sterile smell of the boardroom. Eugene was standing in the open-concept kitchen, casually leaning against the marble island. At 33 years old, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy blazer, he possessed a formidable, quiet physical presence. Eugene was the chairman of an elite private equity firm, a man who navigated the ruthless financial sector with surgical precision. But in our home, he was simply my anchor. Looking up, his dark eyes instantly read the slight tension in my shoulders. He did not ask frantic questions. Walking over, wrapping his strong arms around me, and pressing a warm kiss to my forehead was his only response. His silent, unwavering support was a fortress. Then, the chaotic, beautiful sound of small footsteps echoed from the hallway. Noah and Natalia came running into the living room. Noah was 7 years old, and Natalia was 5. Adopting them both 3 years ago had changed everything. They were both neurodivergent, possessing beautiful, unique minds that processed the world with a brilliant, unfiltered intensity. Noah immediately dropped to the soft rug, meticulously lining up small wooden blocks with absolute, unwavering focus. Natalia ran straight to me, throwing her small arms tightly around my knees, burying her face in the expensive fabric of my trousers. Dropping my briefcase, sinking to my knees to wrap my arms around her small shoulders felt like breathing again. Humming a low, specific tune always helped soothe her sensory overloads. She looked up at me, her bright eyes filled with absolute, unconditional trust. Holding my children, the stark, violent contrast between my past and my present became painfully clear. Valerie and Halland had viewed children as social accessories, investments that needed to yield flawless report cards and perfect country club aesthetics. Failing to meet their rigid, superficial standards meant being discarded like defective merchandise. But looking at Noah organizing his blocks and feeling Natalia's tiny hands gripping my shirt, a surge of protective love so powerful it practically burned rushed through me. They did not care about the $3.5 billion merger. They did not care about stock options or media profiles. Loving me for exactly who I was came naturally to them. Building an empire of concrete and capital was one thing, but this quiet room, filled with acceptance and patience, was my true masterpiece. They were my real home. Later that night, the city below was completely silent, wrapped in a thick blanket of coastal fog. The glowing hands of the digital clock on the desk read 11:30. Sitting in our dimly lit home office, the only illumination came from a sleek brass reading lamp. Eugene sat quietly in the leather armchair across from me, a glass of sparkling water resting in his hand. The last hour had been spent meticulously discussing the text message and the aggressive return of the people who shared my genetic makeup. Leaving the desk, the heavy, fireproof steel safe concealed behind a built-in bookshelf awaited. Punching in the complex digital code sent the heavy bolt sliding back with a solid, satisfying mechanical clack. Reaching deep into the back of the steel vault, I pulled out a weathered, heavy cedar box. It still smelled faintly of fresh sawdust and motor oil, a scent that instantly transported me back to the dusty corners of Uncle Eric's lumberyard. Carrying the box to the mahogany desk, the simple brass lock unlatched easily. Inside rested the foundational documents of my entire empire. Bypassing the stacks of early incorporation papers, the original land deeds, and the corporate stock certificates, my hands found the very bottom of the box. Pulling out a thick, cream-colored legal envelope revealed premium archival paper. But it was not the quality of the paper that made it so incredibly valuable. Sealed perfectly across the back flap was a thick, dark red wax seal. Stamped firmly into the center of the wax was not a family crest or a corporate logo, but a highly specific, highly official blue ink stamp from a federal medical examiner. It was a certified, undeniable piece of medical and legal documentation. Uncle Eric had been a quiet man, but he was profoundly brilliant. Knowing exactly how greedy and relentless Valerie and Halland were, he anticipated that the moment any measurable level of success was achieved, they would circle back like starving vultures looking for a payout. Before passing away, making sure I was armed to the teeth was his final act of love. He had built an impenetrable legal fortress around my assets, sealing the doors with undeniable empirical evidence. Breaking the red wax seal was unnecessary. Reading the documents inside was not required to know exactly what they contained. Running my fingers over the raised edge of the federal stamp, the cold, hard reality of absolute legal protection felt deeply reassuring. Looking up, meeting Eugene's dark, analytical gaze across the shadowed room, a silent, knowing communication passed between us. The trap was perfectly set. When the text message had first vibrated on the boardroom table, a highly specific physiological reaction had seized my body. For a fraction of a millisecond, breathing stopped entirely, and my muscles locked into a rigid state of paralysis. It was a classic freeze response. When conditioned from birth to believe that you are a fundamentally defective product, your nervous system never truly forgets the feeling of the butcher's block. Being transported back to a freezing, windswept afternoon at exactly 14 years old happened instantly. Standing on the pristine, perfectly manicured driveway of my parents' sprawling suburban estate felt entirely real again. The cold autumn wind, biting through a thin cotton sweater, made my teeth chatter violently in my memory. Valerie storming down the front porch steps, her perfectly manicured nails digging painfully into the soft flesh of my upper arm, was etched into my brain. She was aggressively dragging 3 heavy crate, cheap black plastic garbage bags behind her. Those thin plastic bags contained every single piece of clothing, every worn-out schoolbook, and every meager possession to my name. Hurling them onto the hard concrete driveway with a theatrical, deeply impatient grunt showed her true nature. One of the bags catching on a jagged rock, tearing open and spilling history textbooks into a muddy puddle, perfectly summarized my childhood. Having severe dyslexia meant my brain simply processed spatial logic and systemic information in a way that standardized school testing could never measure. But to Halland and Valerie, I was nothing more than a failed investment. Requiring a flawless, picturesque family dynamic to parade around at elite country club dinners was their obsession. Being the embarrassing stain on their carefully cultivated social canvas was my assigned role. "You are dragging Isabella's academic profile down," Valerie had sneered, her voice dripping with toxic, unadulterated disgust. Looking at me with cold, dead eyes, completely devoid of any maternal instinct, she made her priorities clear. Up on the second floor, Isabella stood behind the glass of her elegant bedroom window, wearing a pristine cashmere sweater. Watching me get violently discarded with a highly satisfied, arrogant smirk resting on her face was her contribution. Looking toward my father, desperately hoping for intervention, proved useless. Hallen, standing next to his gleaming silver luxury sedan, offered no comfort, scribbling his signature on a stack of guardianship transfer documents. Handing the clipboard to a waiting social worker and getting into his car was all he did. Driving away without a single backward glance sealed my fate. Abandoning a child that day was only part of the equation. Actively, maliciously trying to destroy my sense of self-worth was the real goal. But they had made a massive miscalculation. They threw away a diamond. Being discarded was not because of teenage rebellion or inherent badness. Violently pushing me out of the biological family happened simply because my brain did not fit into their perfectly curated, highly superficial mold. Struggling severely with reading assignments, often confusing the shapes of letters and failing basic standardized tests, was my reality. When finally diagnosed with severe dyslexia, a normal family would have seen it as a hurdle to overcome together. But to Valerie and Halland, the diagnosis was treated like an absolute social catastrophe. Their toxic obsession with maintaining an image of flawless perfection among their elite country club circles blinded them completely. My twin sister, Isabella, was the designated golden child, possessing the exact kind of superficial, easily measurable brilliance that they absolutely worshipped made her the favorite. Bringing home flawless report cards, playing complex classical piano pieces for wealthy dinner guests, and being aggressively groomed from childhood for a prestigious law degree was her daily life. Unlimited access to premium credit cards, seasonal designer wardrobes, and relentless, suffocating praise were handed to her freely. Being the exact opposite, the embarrassing secret they actively tried to hide in the background of their lavish lives, was my burden. Failing an 8th grade reading comprehension exam was the final, devastating blow to their fragile egos. Hiring a specialized tutor to help me was never considered. Sitting down with patience to understand how my mind worked was out of the question. Instead, packing meager belongings into those cheap, easily torn plastic garbage bags was Valerie's solution. Hallen driving to the industrial outskirts of the city, pulling his gleaming silver luxury sedan up to the rusted chain-link fence of Uncle Eric's lumberyard, was the final journey. Getting out of the car was beneath him. Offering a single word of explanation, a hug, or even a basic goodbye did not happen. Simply rolling down the tinted window, hastily scribbling his signature on a transfer of guardianship document, handing the clipboard to a waiting social worker, and driving away was how he handled it. Isabella got the grand, temperature-controlled mansion and the Ivy League dreams. Getting the loud, deafening roar of heavy commercial sawmills and a thin, lumpy mattress in a dusty back office was my inheritance. Genuinely thinking they had buried me in the sawdust. They assumed my life was over. They were entirely wrong. Uncle Eric was Hallen's older brother, but the two men could not have been more fundamentally different. Eric was a quiet, rugged individual who had spent his entire life working with his bare hands. Owning a sprawling, chaotic lumberyard that specialized in reclaiming and processing old timber defined him. When dropped at his doorstep, shivering and utterly terrified, empty platitudes or fake, performative sympathy were not offered. Looking at me, handing over a heavy canvas work jacket, and giving me a broom was his version of a welcome. For the first few months, sweeping the massive warehouse floors in absolute, unbroken silence was the only task. Watching the massive, terrifying steel saws cut effortlessly through ancient, discarded beams became a daily meditation. Slowly, quietly, Eric began to notice something my parents had been completely blind to. Because processing linear letters on a flat page was a struggle, my brain had dramatically overcompensated in other areas. An exceptionally high, almost genius-level aptitude for three-dimensional spatial logic and systemic organization began to surface. Forcing me to read standard textbooks or memorize useless historical dates was not Eric's method. Handing over complex architectural blueprints and highly chaotic supply chain, manifests yielded completely different results. To my profound surprise, the intricate webs of numbers, angles, and structural diagrams made perfect, crystal clear sense. Looking at a massive pile of rotting, discarded redwood beams instantly triggered calculations on exactly how they could be milled, treated, and repurposed for high-end ecological construction. Seeing the hidden, immense value in things that other people eagerly threw away became a superpower. Eric became my sole, dedicated mentor, taking me to proper educational specialists who taught effective strategies to manage dyslexia changed everything. Listening to innovative ideas without ever talking down to me built genuine confidence. By age 16, completely redesigning his entire inventory tracking system from the ground up, optimizing the warehouse flow, and doubling his quarterly profit margins was a reality. Treating me with absolute, unwavering respect was his standard. Being the only person in the entire bloodline who saw a human being with immense potential, rather than a defective, embarrassing burden, made all the difference. He taught me everything. The fragile, beautiful piece meticulously built at the lumberyard completely shattered the year I turned 20. A freezing, overcast Tuesday morning brought the call from the local hospital. Uncle Eric had suffered a massive, catastrophic stroke while operating the main forklift, sitting rigidly by his sterile hospital bed for 3 excruciating days, holding his large, calloused hand until the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor finally flatlined, was agonizing. Losing the only real father figure ever known carved a massive hole directly into my chest. But grieving in peace was not permitted. The dark ink on his official death certificate was barely dry when Valerie and Halland suddenly reappeared. Coming to the sterile hospital ward to offer condolences was not their style. Asking how the profound, devastating loss was being handled never crossed their minds. Marching straight into the dusty back office of the lumberyard, wearing expensive, impeccably tailored designer coats, looking around the warehouse with absolute, undisguised disgust was their only priority. Somehow discovering that Eric's business had hit a temporary financial rough patch due to a massive machinery failure just before his sudden death. Leaving the yard with a significant operating debt gave them leverage. Knowing the underlying commercial real estate was highly valuable made their eyes gleam. Slamming a thick, highly predatory commercial loan agreement onto the worn wooden desk was Halland's opening move. Isabella is starting her pre-law program at a top-tier university, and the tuition is completely exorbitant, Halland stated, his voice completely devoid of any basic empathy. You are going to officially co-sign this debt consolidation loan. We will use the cash payout for her education, and you will work in this filthy yard to pay off the massive interest. It is the absolute least you can do to repay us for giving you life. They wanted me ruined. Being exactly 20 years old, physically exhausted, entirely consumed by fresh grief, and suddenly staring at a mountain of highly aggressive commercial debt was paralyzing. For a brief, pathetic moment, the desperate, unloved child buried deep inside surfaced, foolishly, naively believing that clearly explaining the brutal mathematical reality of the situation might elicit a single ounce of basic human decency from my mother was a mistake. Picking up the heavy landline receiver in the lumberyard office and dialing the familiar number to their sprawling suburban estate felt like a lifeline. Valerie answering on the third. Sharp ring offered a glimmer of hope. Trying desperately to keep my voice steady, the raw exhaustion and fear bled right through the words anyway. Explaining that signing that specific, highly leveraged loan to fund Isabella's lavish tuition would ensure the lumberyard would not survive the next fiscal quarter was the logical approach. Losing the entire business, the heavy equipment, and the only roof overhead was the guaranteed outcome. Begging her to find another way to pay for Isabella's schooling felt degrading. Pleading for just a sliver of maternal mercy was the ultimate humiliation. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, heavy, and deeply chilling. When Valerie finally spoke, her voice was a smooth, calculated, and incredibly sharp blade, I don't have time to listen to your dramatic, pathetic excuses, she sneered, the sheer ice in her tone freezing the blood in my veins. Isabella is actually going to be somebody important in this city. She is building a real, highly respectable legacy for this family. You are just a dirty warehouse worker. Your little wood shop means absolutely nothing compared to her brilliant future. Sign the papers tomorrow, or we will legally tie this estate up in probate court until you literally starve. Hanging up the phone without another word was her final judgment. The sharp, mechanical dial tone echoed loudly in the quiet, dusty office. Slowly placing the heavy plastic receiver back onto the cradle sealed the moment. The very last fragile thread of hope ever harbored for the biological family completely snapped. I wiped my eyes. Sitting completely still in the dim, flickering light of the warehouse office, listening to the heavy autumn rain drumming relentlessly against the tin roof, marked absolute emotional rock bottom. The only protector was gone. Parents actively, maliciously trying to force permanent financial ruin to fund a sister's vanity meant being completely alone in the world. Allowing exactly 5 minutes to feel the crushing, suffocating weight of the profound betrayal was necessary. Letting the hot tears fall silently, grieving not just for Uncle Eric, but for the family that never truly existed, was the final purge. And then, it completely stopped. Reaching up and aggressively wiping the moisture from my face shifted the paradigm. Looking down at the predatory loan agreement Holland had practically demanded be signed brought clarity. Crying was not going to pay the commercial property taxes. Weeping over a mother's chilling cruelty was not going to repair the broken sawmill machinery. In the ruthless, unforgiving world of business, grief is a massive luxury, and panic is an absolute liability. Picking up the thick, heavy contract, tearing it precisely in half with a sharp rip, and dropping it directly into the metal trash can was liberating. Sacrificing an uncle's hard-earned legacy to fund a golden child who had happily watched the garbage bag eviction was never going to happen. Spending the next 48 hours wide awake, fueled entirely by cheap, bitter coffee and pure, unadulterated adrenaline, yielded results. Pulling every single ledger, every inventory manifest, and every client contract from the filing cabinet started the process. Using the systemic logic Eric had helped cultivate, completely restructuring the yard's entire financial framework became the focus. Drafting a brilliant, highly aggressive recovery plan, explicitly pivoting the entire business model toward freemium, reclaimed ecological building materials was the masterstroke. Walking into the local commercial bank the very next morning, entirely bypassing the toxic demands, and successfully securing an independent line of credit based strictly on highly optimized projections changed the trajectory. The terrified victim was gone. I became a CEO. The next 10 years of life were defined by absolute, uncompromising silence and grueling, relentless labor, while Isabella was attending lavish college fraternity parties and posting heavily filtered photos of her supposedly elite academic journey, wearing steel-toed boots, breathing in sawdust, and analyzing global supply chain logistics until vision blurred was the reality here. Taking vacations was not an option. Buying designer clothes seemed frivolous. Every single cent of profit managed to be generated was aggressively and systematically reinvested directly back into the company. Taking Uncle Eric's basic lumber reclamation model and evolving it into a highly sophisticated, zero-waste ecological materials, empire required vision. Realizing early on that the commercial real estate market was rapidly shifting towards sustainable, green infrastructure was key. High-end developers were suddenly desperate for ethically sourced, premium structural timber. Because of the brilliant spatial tracking algorithms designed as a teenager, the company was uniquely positioned to completely dominate that emerging market. Selling wood was the past. Selling certified, sustainable architectural integrity was the future. Working closely with environmental engineers, patenting a proprietary wood treatment process, that utilized the natural resins of the redwood, and securing massive, multi-million-dollar government contracts solidified the foundation. The media eventually catching wind of the rapid ascent was inevitable. Financial magazines requesting interviews, labeling the operation a visionary disruptor in the construction sector, became commonplace. But allowing personal history to be published was strictly forbidden. Keeping the biological family entirely out of the press was a calculated move. Knowing that the absolute best revenge was not a screaming match in a crowded room, nor a tearful confrontation, guided every decision, achieving a level of monumental, verified success that completely eclipsed their pathetic, superficial country club existence was the ultimate goal. Building a fortress of capital and legal structure so towering that their petty criticisms could never possibly reach me again became the mission. Taking the profound, agonizing pain of their rejection and transforming it into high-octane fuel for ambition drove the success. They thought a defective failure who could barely read a textbook was all that existed. I proved them completely wrong. During one of those massive, high-stakes commercial acquisitions, crossing paths with Eugene happened at 26 years old, sitting across the table from a room full of aggressive, older corporate executives actively trying to undervalue a sustainable supply chain network was daunting. Eugene sitting at the far end of the boardroom, representing the private equity firm backing the developers, changed the dynamic. Sharp, observant, and completely unbothered by typical corporate posturing, he stood out. When the developers tried to dismiss the complex spatial logistics model, Eugene intervened. Defending the mathematics, not offering pity, was his approach. Looking directly at the executives and calmly dismantling their flawed valuation, pointing out that the proprietary distribution algorithm was actually worth double what they were offering, stunned the room. Sitting down for coffee afterward involved no generic, empty pleasantries. Speaking the exact same language of systemic logic, risk assessment, and long-term strategy formed an instant connection. Eugene, a self-made man navigating his own incredibly difficult past, recognized the invisible armor because he wore a very similar set. As the relationship evolved from professional allies to life partners, experiencing what it meant to be truly valued finally happened. Fixing or changing me to fit a specific aesthetic was never his goal. Looking at the girl who had been thrown away in garbage bags and seeing a brilliant, fiercely capable woman was his perspective. Telling him the truth about Valerie, Halland, and Isabella elicited no empty sympathy. Listening quietly, analyzing the data of the past, was his reaction. Understanding that the biological family was not a group to be reconciled with, but a deeply toxic liability needing permanent management, cemented the bond. Becoming the quiet, unshakable anchor in a rapidly expanding world was his role. With Eugene present, the lingering ghosts of a suburban childhood finally lost their power. We were building our own kingdom. With the company's valuation soaring into the billions and a rock-solid marriage, the only thing missing was a family of our own making a very deliberate, highly conscious decision. Eugene and I chose a different path. Simply passing down wealth through genetics held no appeal. Passing down the profound, unconditional love and acceptance that had been denied in youth was the true objective. Beginning the adoption process meant specifically looking for children being overlooked by the system. Finding Noah and Natalia, biological siblings both diagnosed as neurodivergent, felt like destiny. Potential adoptive families had repeatedly passed them over, intimidated by therapy requirements and the need for specialized educational environments. The system looked at their files and saw complications, burdens, and difficulties. Looking at their files revealed something else entirely. 2 beautiful, innocent children being judged by standardized metrics that failed to capture their true brilliance reflected a familiar story. The day they came home to the penthouse, the sterile, quiet atmosphere was instantly transformed. Building sensory-friendly playrooms, hiring the best developmental specialists, and creating an environment where masking who they truly were was unnecessary became the priority. Valerie and Halland, believing that a child's sole purpose was to act as a shiny, perfect trophy to validate their own fragile social status, was a tragedy. Watching Noah flawlessly memorize the complex blueprints of sustainable warehouses and feeling Natalia's joyful, uninhibited hugs confirmed the absolute truth. Real family is not a biological obligation. It is a daily, active choice to protect, nurture, and respect the people entrusted to your care. The cold, terrifying feeling of a locked door or a garbage bag on a porch would never be their reality. They were entirely safe. That profound, beautiful safety was exactly what Valerie and Halland were trying to violently breach with their sudden reappearance. The morning after the text message interrupted the board meeting, my executive assistant walked into the office carrying a heavy, oversized envelope. Standing out grotesquely against the streamlined, modern efficiency of the corporate workspace, its presence was jarring. The paper was exceptionally thick, textured cardstock, completely sealed with a ridiculous, archaic dollop of gold wax. A massive, ostentatious display of fake wealth. It demanded attention. Breaking the brittle seal and pulling out the invitation revealed excessive decoration with heavy gold embossing, proudly announcing the grand charity gala hosted by Valerie and Halland, supposedly to celebrate their enduring marriage and philanthropic endeavors. Tucked inside the rigid, elegant card was a single, folded piece of personalized stationery. Valerie's sharp, aggressive handwriting was instantly recognizable. The message was not a plea for a family reunion. It was a staggering, unadulterated display of toxic narcissism and criminal extortion. The handwritten note read, "Bring the signed transfer deeds for the Redwood Trust and a certified bank draft for $2 million to the gala tonight. This is your family privacy fee. If you refuse, we already have a press release drafted for the Wall Street Journal detailing how the CEO of this eco company is a deeply disturbed addict who abused her dying uncle. Your initial public offering will completely burn before the bell rings. Do exactly what you are told." Staring at the venomous ultimatum, the sheer, desperate audacity was genuinely marvelous. Actually believing that after 16 years of absolute silence, snapping their fingers, and demanding a multi-million-dollar ransom would work was delusional. Thinking the threat of a public scandal would force the surrender of the foundational asset of an entire corporate empire was laughable. Viewing a life's work as a personal automated teller machine was their fundamental error. I handed the note to Eugene. Eugene did not react with anger. Reacting with the cold, terrifying efficiency of an apex predator analyzing its prey was his default. Taking the gold-embossed invitation and the extortion note, he sat down at the heavy mahogany desk. Opening his encrypted laptop, accessing the private equity firm's massive, highly sophisticated financial intelligence databases was the first step. Running a deep, forensic diagnostic search on Valerie, Halland, and Isabella's recent banking activities commenced. Within 45 minutes, the polished, pristine illusion of their elite country club life completely evaporated on the screen. The charity gala was not a celebration, and it certainly was not philanthropic. It was an incredibly desperate, highly illegal scam. Tracing the registration of the supposed non-governmental organization they were aggressively soliciting funds for revealed the truth. The NGO was completely fake, registered to a dummy corporation in Isabella's name. Isabella was not a brilliant human rights lawyer. Quietly dropping out of her prestigious law program 4 years ago was the reality. The massive tuition fees Halland had tried to force upon the lumberyard had been entirely funneled into high-stakes underground gambling rings, luxury designer boutiques, and exorbitant secret vacations with a string of wealthy, married men. The parents were completely bankrupt, drowning under a mountain of severe, highly leveraged debt taken out to maintain Isabella's fake, perfect facade, hosting this lavish gala to collect massive seed funding checks from gullible socialite friends. intending to use the cash to pay off aggressive loan sharks before losing their sprawling estate, was the actual plan. If you believe that absolute facts are the best weapon against pathological liars, hit like and share your thought below. The $2 million and the Redwood Trust they were demanding was their absolute last. Desperate lifeline. Cornered animals, lashing out with fabricated threats to save their rotting kingdom. They were predictable. Eugene turning the laptop screen outward, a cold, dark smile touching the corners of his mouth, signaled the end of the line. Negotiating with terrorists was unnecessary. We were going to the party. Calling Galvin immediately after Eugene verified the fraudulent nature of the charity gala was imperative. Meeting at a highly secure, private executive lounge downtown. Galvin looked completely exhausted. The heavy bags under his eyes stood as a testament to the grueling 80-hour work weeks pulled as a corporate compliance officer. Frantically trying to understand why Isabella's supposed law school debt was spiraling violently out of control consumed him. Offering empty platitudes was not the objective. Sitting down across from him, pulling the thick, cream-colored legal envelope with the red wax seal from the briefcase, and placing it on the table between us set the stage. Galvin needed to understand exactly why Valerie and Hallen's aggressive extortion attempt was not just cruel, but fundamentally, legally impossible. Cracking the red wax seal and pulling out the original documents drafted by Uncle Eric began the revelation. They are demanding a transfer deed for the Redwood Trust. Explaining the situation to Galvin required a perfectly level and clinical voice. But they are operating under a massive legal delusion. They believe Eric simply left the land in a standard will. A standard will can be contested in probate court by hostile family members. It can be frozen, negotiated, or tied up in endless litigation. But Eric was much smarter than that. Sliding the heavy legal document across the table emphasized the point. A will was not used. An ironclad, irrevocable trust was established. The moment this document was signed 16 years ago, the absolute ownership of the land was permanently transferred out of his personal estate and directly into the trust. Because it is irrevocable, it cannot be modified, amended, or terminated by anyone, not even by Eric himself while he was alive. Galvin's analytical eyes rapidly scanning the complex legal jargon allowed his professional compliance background to instantly recognize the brilliant, impenetrable architecture of the document. "The land isn't personally owned," Galvin murmured, a look of profound realization washing over his tired face. "The trust owns the land. You are simply the sole designated trustee and beneficiary." "Exactly." A cold smile forming confirmed his assessment. "There is a strict spendthrift clause embedded right here in Section 4. It explicitly prevents any beneficiary from selling, transferring, or using the trust's principal assets to settle personal debts or external extortion demands. Even if Valerie and Hallen physically forced a pen into a hand and demanded a signed transfer deed tonight, the document would be completely worthless. The law explicitly forbids giving them what they want." Leaning back in the leather chair, watching the absolute certainty of the law settle into the room felt powerful. Standing behind a massive, impenetrable fortress of legal process provided ultimate security. Now it was Galvin's turn to reveal his weapons. Galvin, carefully setting the irrevocable trust documents aside, signaled a shift. Reaching into his own battered leather briefcase and pulling out a massive, heavily tabbed stack of financial audit reports revealed his preparation. The man who had spent the last 4 years bending over backward to appease toxic in-laws, draining personal savings to fund a wife's supposed elite education, was completely gone. Sitting in his place was a cold, meticulously precise financial auditor who had just uncovered a massive, devastating fraud. A full forensic diagnostic on joint accounts and Isabella's private credit lines was completed. Galvin began, his voice dropping to a low, trembling register, demanding absolute attention. Valerie and Halland, aggressively pressuring for a second mortgage to cover the final semester of Isabella's human rights law program was constant. Claiming she was on the verge of securing a prestigious federal clerkship was their main tactic. Flipping the heavy report open to a highlighted page exposed the lie. Isabella is not on the verge of a federal clerkship. She is not even a law student. Pulling her official university transcripts yesterday morning confirmed it. Formally dropping out of the law program exactly 4 years ago is the truth. The sheer magnitude of the deception hung heavily in the quiet executive lounge. Looking down at the highlighted banking statements, the reality that a complete ghost had been funded settled in. So where did the $300,000 go? The question was asked softly, dreading the mathematical reality of the findings. Turning the page, his jaw set in a hard, unforgiving line, Galvin delivered the blow. The tuition wires were routed through a dummy holding company registered to Valerie. From there, the funds were systematically dispersed into high-stakes underground casinos, luxury designer boutiques, and exclusive resort fees. But the most pathetic discovery of all were the recurring weekly withdrawals categorized as legal consultation fees. Pointing a steady finger at a column of red numbers highlighted the ultimate betrayal. Those transfers were not going to a law professor or a study group. They were being wired directly to a man named Trent. While 80-hour weeks were worked to support her brilliant legal mind, she was funneling hard-earned salary to a secret lover. The fog of familial obligation and blind love instantly evaporating from Galvin, his eyes left behind a landscape of absolute, freezing clarity. Being targeted as a highly lucrative mark, a walking bank account designed to fund Isabella's secret addictions, and her parents' desperate need to maintain their wealthy facade, was fully understood. Closing the thick audit report with a definitive, sharp snap finalized the decision. Divorcing her is not the only plan, Galvin stated, his posture radiating a quiet, dangerous power. Dismantling them completely is the objective. The alliance was perfectly forged. Spending the rest of the afternoon exchanging angry, heated threats or engaging in petty emotional breakdowns was not on the agenda. Operating with the cold, absolute precision of a highly synchronized corporate execution team was the only way forward. Retreating to the penthouse, transforming the massive dining table into a tactical command center, focused the energy. The contrast between the parents' loud, tacky, gold-embossed invitation and the quiet, lethal preparation underway was stark and undeniable. Eugene, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, adjusting the silver cufflinks of a bespoke midnight charcoal tuxedo, projected calmly reviewing the digital portfolio containing the massive, defaulted debt acquisitions his private equity firm had successfully purchased from Hallen's creditors was his final check. Galvin, sitting at the mahogany desk, wearing a razor-sharp, double-breasted gray suit, reviewed his own arsenal, meticulously organizing the forensic audit, slipping the undeniable proof of Isabella's embezzlement, gambling, and adultery into a heavy premium leather folio, readied his strike. Standing in front of the hallway mirror, smoothing the structured lapels of a midnight green silk gown, confirmed the aesthetic. Dressing to blend in with a gaudy, flashy social circle was never the goal. Dressing to completely obliterate them was. No massive, ostentatious diamonds screaming for attention were worn. Only the purest manifestation of quiet luxury and unshakable confidence. Gathering the irrevocable trust documents, slipping them securely into a sleek clutch, completed the ensemble. Before we step into this ballroom, tell me, have you ever confronted a narcissist in public? How did it go? Let me know in the comments. The sun dipping below the San Francisco skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the penthouse, signaled the moment. Eugene walking over, placing a warm, grounding hand on the lower back, provided the anchor. Galvin picking up his leather folio, his face a mask of absolute, unforgiving resolve, indicated readiness. Walking out of the penthouse, stepping into the waiting private elevator, bypassing the busy lobby, and moving seamlessly into the back of the waiting luxury SUV happened in smooth succession. As the car glided smoothly through the vibrant city streets toward the historic downtown district, silence reigned. The quiet in the vehicle was not born of anxiety or hesitation. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of an incoming storm. Valerie and Halland, spending their entire lives treating people as disposable transactions, entirely confident in their fabricated superiority, was about to end. Tonight, their fragile, rotting kingdom of lies would be subjected to the unforgiving, blinding light of empirical data. The car slowed to a halt in front of the grand, historic mansion. The scene inside the grand ballroom of the historic mansion was a spectacular, sickening display of desperate, bleeding capital. Massive, towering floral arrangements of white orchids dominated tables covered in pristine silk linens. Waiters in crisp white gloves circulated smoothly through the crowd, balancing silver trays piled high with imported caviar and vintage champagne. Hundreds of wealthy investors, elite venture capitalists, and prominent local politicians were seated in the lavishly decorated space, completely oblivious to the fact that they were being aggressively courted for a massive, fraudulent scam. At the very front of the expansive room, standing on a brightly lit, raised stage, was Valerie, draped in a sequined, aggressively bright red designer gown that screamed of suburban country club desperation. She demanded attention. Clutching a microphone with both hands, right in the middle of a highly rehearsed, deeply manipulative performance, she played her part. It has been a journey of profound, unimaginable heartache. Valerie projected into the microphone, her voice trembling with perfectly manufactured sorrow. As many of you know, Halland and I have endured the agonizing pain of a tragic, estranged daughter. We poured our hearts and our resources into her, but some souls are simply lost to rebellion and darkness. Through that unimaginable grief, we found the strength to channel our love into something pure. We found the strength to support Isabella's brilliant, selfless legal crusade for human rights. The elite crowd, murmuring in sympathetic agreement, proved they were thoroughly captivated by the tragic narrative of a wealthy mother enduring the shame of a failed, wayward child. Halland, standing slightly behind his wife, his chest puffed out, nodding solemnly to the audience, projected the image of a stoic, wealthy patriarch perfectly. Sitting at the prime 5 IP table directly below the stage was Isabella, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the role of the exhausted, dedicated legal scholar flawlessly, selling a narrative of a generous, loving family seeking funds for a groundbreaking nonprofit organization was working. The wealthy socialites actively pulling out checkbooks were completely unaware that massive donations were destined straight for underground casinos and aggressive loan sharks. Valerie, smiling through fake tears, soaking up the adulation and pity of wealthy peers, fully believed victory was secured. Then, the heavy mahogany double doors at the back of the ballroom were violently thrown open. The heavy wooden doors did not just open. They swung apart with a resonant, echoing thud that instantly severed the soft music of the string quartet. The collective murmuring of the elite crowd ground to a sudden, discordant halt. Hundreds of wealthy socialites and aggressive venture capitalists turned in their velvet-upholstered chairs to stare at the back of the hall. Valerie, lowering the microphone, her fake, tragic smile freezing on a heavily contoured face, signaled the shift. Expecting to see a broken, desperate woman crawling into the room with a $2 million check to beg for family forgiveness was their anticipation. Instead, being hit by the sheer, overwhelming force of quiet luxury changed the atmosphere. Striding down the center aisle, posture radiating absolute, unapologetic authority, set the tone. Eugene, moving in perfect synchronization, an impenetrable wall of silent power, reinforced it, walking not alone, but holding hands with Noah and Natalia, completely disarmed the tense atmosphere with their unfiltered joy. The children looking around the glittering ballroom with wide, fascinated eyes, entirely oblivious to the dark, toxic energy of the people on the stage, provided a profound, radiant contrast to the rotting lies filling the room. Halland, entirely stripped of his fake philanthropic persona by the sudden intrusion, lost his temper. Marching to the edge of the stage, his face twisting into a mask of visceral, unadulterated disgust, revealed the truth. "Keep those defective things away from my daughter's gala!" Halland hissed fiercely into the silent room. Intending it to be an intimidating whisper, failed because, in blinding rage, he forgot Valerie was still holding the live microphone right next to him. His vile, hateful command echoing across the silent room with razor-sharp clarity, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers, could not be unsaid. A wave of profound, appalled silence crashing over the ballroom was immediate. At a nearby table, a wealthy dowager, audibly gasping, her champagne flute slipping from her hand, punctuated the shock. But the true reckoning came from the prime head table. Eric Sterling, the undisputed billionaire kingmaker of the city's financial district, the primary target of their scam rising abruptly, shifted the power. Turning his back on the stage, walking directly toward the center aisle, and stopping in front of the group commanded attention. Bowing respectfully to Eugene was unexpected. "Mr. Eugene, it is a profound honor. And Jesse," Sterling said, his rich voice carrying effortlessly through the quiet hall, "I cannot thank your ecological foundation enough for the recent grant. Your company's highly successful public offering last week is a beacon for this city's sustainable future." Holland's face draining to a sickly, translucent white confirmed it. The illusion was dead. The sheer magnitude of Eric Sterling's words acting like a gravitational event completely warped the reality of the room. The realization hitting the elite audience like a physical blow changed everything. A struggling, wayward addict was not standing there. The CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire was... Valerie, dropping her microphone, letting it hit the wooden stage floor with a loud, shrieking blast of feedback that made several guests wince, could not tear eyes away from the spectacle. Before the panic could fully set in, Galvin stepping seamlessly past was the next phase. Walking up the carpeted stairs of the stage, moving with the precise, mechanical efficiency of an executioner, he took control. Bypassing Valerie and Halland without affording them a single glance, walking directly to the center of the platform, he picked up the discarded microphone, the sharp feedback instantly dying under his controlled grip. "Since we are celebrating family and new philanthropic ventures tonight," Galvin announced, his voice smooth, professional, and carrying the lethal weight of an incoming storm, "I think we should take a very close look at the finances funding this party." Raising his hand in a subtle gesture signaled the next move. From the service doors, dozens of waitstaff handsomely compensated hours before the event emerged carrying thick, heavily stapled dossiers. Moving swiftly through the ballroom, distributing the audit packets directly to the venture capitalists and the politicians. Executed the plan perfectly. "My name is Galvin, and until very recently, I was married to Isabella," he continued, looking down at his terrified wife. "If you turn to page 3 of the forensic audit you just received, you will see the exact credit card statements Isabella used to fund tonight's gala. She stole my identity, maxed out lines of credit in my name, and funneled the money into shell accounts managed by her mother." The collective rustle of hundreds of pages filling the cavernous hall was the sound of ruin. Isabella, scrambling to her feet, her face contorted in feral panic, was useless. "He's lying!" she shrieked, lunging toward the stage. Galvin didn't flinch. "Page 7 details the true nature of her legal career. Isabella dropped out of law school 4 years ago. The hundreds of thousands of dollars her parents are begging you to invest tonight go directly to high-stakes underground casinos and her secret lover, Trent." As Isabella reached the edge of the stage, desperately clawing for the microphone. Galvin smoothly reached into his bespoke jacket, pulling out a heavy, blue-backed legal document and slapping it firmly against her chest, finalized the process. "Here's the petition for dissolution of marriage. Good luck." Isabella collapsing onto the floorboards, sobbing uncontrollably as the entire room glared at her in absolute revulsion, concluded his business. The grand ballroom completely devolving into absolute chaos was the intended result. Elite investors who had been considering writing massive checks suddenly standing up, angrily slamming the audit dossiers onto pristine tables, and shouting demands for previous investments to be returned immediately, shattered the facade. The glittering high society event being violently transformed into an active crime scene left the architects of the fraud entirely trapped under blinding stage lights. Holland, completely stripped of arrogant bluster, backing against the heavy velvet stage drapes, looked for an exit. Eyes darting wildly around the hostile room finally locked onto the targets. In his broken, panicked mind, believing immense wealth could still serve as a personal bailout was his final delusion. Pushing blindly past a stunned venture capitalist, stumbling down the center aisle, he crashed to his knees on the hard marble floor, sweat pouring down his purple, blotchy face. "Jesse, please," Howland begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical sob. Reaching out with trembling hands, desperately trying to grab the hem of a silk gown, was pathetic. "We are blood. You are my daughter. You have to write the checks. You have to save us from this. They are going to take the house. I am begging you. Show your family some mercy." Eugene immediately stepping forward, his tall, imposing frame shielding the target from the weeping man, halted the advance. Looking down at Howland with an expression of profound, freezing amusement, he spoke. "You do not seem to understand the severity of your situation, Howland," Eugene said, his resonant baritone effortlessly cutting through the noise of the angry crowd. "My private equity firm specializes in acquiring highly distressed, toxic assets," Eugene explained, projecting his voice for the front row to hear. "Over the past 6 months, quietly purchasing your debt has been the focus. All of it. We hold the primary liens on your residential properties. We acquired the defaulted loans on your dummy shell corporations. You do not owe these investors anymore. You owe me." Howland collapsing entirely, his forehead pressing against the cold marble as he let out a pathetic, suffocated wheeze, was the end of his resistance. Looking down at the man who had mercilessly orchestrated the garbage bag eviction 16 years ago evoked nothing. A gaze completely devoid of anger, hatred, or pity, feeling only a profound, freezing apathy, met his form. "Blood means absolutely nothing when it is entirely poisoned, Howland." The statement rang out cold and perfectly steady. Turning away, shielding the children from the rotting spectacle on the floor, was the only action required. They were finally, utterly destroyed. The ballroom, which had been a cacophony of shouting and accusations, falling into a suffocating, unnatural silence, signaled one last desperate attempt. From the back of the stage, Valerie's attorney stepped forward, his face a mask of desperate, performative confidence. Holding up a single, crisp sheet of paper, he made his stand. "This is preposterous," he shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "I have here the most recent, legally binding will of Eric, signed and notarized just 3 days before his passing. It explicitly revokes the previous trust and mandates that all assets be returned to the family." A murmur of confusion rippling through the crowd gave them hope. Valerie's face lighting up with a grotesque, triumphant sneer, and Holland standing taller, glaring with renewed, sickening arrogance, showed they believed this forged piece of paper was their salvation. Thinking they had effectively countered the audit was a grave error. Standing perfectly still, expression utterly placid, ignoring the lawyer and the forged document, A simple signal to Eugene was given. Eugene stepping forward, not with anger, but with the cold, precise efficiency of a forensic auditor expecting this exact move, dismantled the lie, not raising his voice, reaching into his leather portfolio, and pulling out a thick, official-looking document with a federal government stamp ended the game. Finding it fascinating, Eugene said, his voice ringing with clinical precision, that you would produce a document signed by Eric 3 days before his death. Because I have here the official federal medical report from the hospital where Eric spent his final week. On that specific date, Eric suffered a massive, catastrophic stroke that left his entire right side completely paralyzed. His hand was so immobilized by nerve damage that he could not even hold a straw to drink water, let alone sign a notarized legal document. Stepping toward the lawyer, dropping the medical report onto the paper the man was holding, Eugene delivered the checkmate. The notary whose name is on that document is currently under investigation for 7 counts of fraud. You want to submit this to a federal judge, please do. The lawyer's face draining of all color, his hands shaking so violently the paper rattled against his palms, confirmed his defeat. Not even trying to defend it, simply shoving the paper into his briefcase and sprinting off the stage, disappearing into the shadows of the wings, was his only option. The lies were gone. Only the truth remained. The collapse of the false will being the final nail in the coffin was undeniable. Valerie's knees giving out, sinking to the floor of the stage, her sequined red gown catching on the wooden boards, marked her end. Halland standing frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, utterly incapable of processing the magnitude of his defeat, was poetic. Spending an entire life bullying people, and now realizing that bullying had absolutely no power here, was a harsh awakening. The heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom clicking open signaled the final phase. The legal team, led by a formidable woman named Dorothy, marching in with synchronized, relentless purpose, brought reality. Not coming to argue, but to execute. They moved efficiently. Dorothy walking straight to the VIP table where Valerie and Halland were huddled, pulling a thick stack of finalized, court-approved documents from her leather folio, began the procedure. Pursuant to the emergency orders granted by the Federal District Court, Dorothy recited, her voice crisp and sharp, cutting through the heavy air like a guillotine. We are executing the immediate seizure of all assets tied to the fraudulent corporate entities operated under your name. Valerie, letting out a high-pitched, guttural whimper, did not pause the reading. Effective immediately, all offshore accounts traced to your shell corporations have been frozen. The fleet of luxury vehicles currently registered to your estate has been impounded. Furthermore, the residential foreclosure notice is now active. Security agents are already at the residence, and the locks have been changed. You are legally barred from entering the premises. Flipping a page, delivering the final social death blow. Dorothy continued, and due to the severe nature of your financial crimes and the misappropriation of pension funds, the board of the country club has permanently revoked your memberships. You are officially exiled from this community. It was over. The life built on the backs of others had been burned to ash. Turning away from them, shielding Noah and Natalia, and walking toward the exit, left them to their ruin. Exactly 1 year later, the world felt fundamentally different. The crisp, clean breeze of early autumn sweeping through the sprawling, impeccably manicured backyard of the countryside estate was refreshing. The massive oak trees turning a vibrant, brilliant shade of gold, and the air filled with the gentle, joyous sounds of a childhood never permitted to be experienced. Marked Noah and Natalia's 8th birthday celebration. The backyard serving as a sanctuary, entirely devoid of the toxic, performative stress that had defined every gathering of youth, was perfect. Eugene standing by the massive outdoor stone grill, flipping high-quality burgers and laughing deeply at a joke Galvin had just made, showed how much had changed. Galvin seamlessly transitioning from the exhausted, betrayed auditor into a cherished, permanent fixture of the family, was a welcome sight. Finding his own peace, his forensic consulting firm thriving, and finally being genuinely happy suited him well. Watching them laugh together, completely at ease, brought a profound, steady sense of satisfaction. Noah and Natalia laughing too, running through a beautifully crafted sensory garden designed specifically for them, was the ultimate reward. Completely free, completely safe, and entirely, deeply loved. They thrived, never knowing the cold, sharp sting of conditional affection, the terror of a locked door, the humiliation of being tossed out into the freezing rain, or the agonizing uncertainty of being told they were a disappointment, was guaranteed. The scent of sweet, smoky barbecue filling the air complemented the moment. Taking a slow, deep breath, feeling an absolute, unshakable stillness in the soul, brought reflection. For so long, viewing the past as a prison, a cruel, cold place designed to break spirit, had been the norm. But looking at the empire of love, wealth, and loyalty forged from those bitter, freezing ashes revealed the truth. The past had not been a prison. It had been a crucible. It was the fire that forged the diamond. While standing on the peaceful stone patio watching the children thrive, the reality of the former family was a vastly different, grimmer picture. The federal investigation, moving with ruthless, surgical efficiency, had taken its toll. Every hidden asset stripped away, every luxury vehicle sold at public auction, was the consequence. Avoiding lengthy prison sentences meant Halland and Valerie accepting a brutal, ironclad plea deal that left them with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs and a mountain of legal restitution they could never hope to repay. Their current reality, a cramped, crumbling studio apartment located above a noisy, 24-hour laundromat in the most dilapidated section of the city, was fitting. The peeling yellow wallpaper and the perpetual, suffocating smell of bleach and damp rot was a far cry from the vaulted ceilings and imported marble once called home. Valerie, once spending leisurely afternoons sipping champagne at exclusive clubs, now spent days standing for grueling 9-hour shifts at a discount retail store, enduring the harsh, disrespectful complaints of bargain hunters. Halland faring no better, stripped of corporate authority and permanently barred from holding any financial license, found a new path. Reduced to a stock boy at a local hardware store, hauling heavy, awkward boxes of nails and stacking bags of fertilizer under the harsh glare of flickering fluorescent lights, was his reality. Spending evenings in a tiny, suffocating room, screaming vicious, venomous insults at each other over the loud, rhythmic hum of a broken window air conditioning unit, bitterly fighting over whose fault it was that the perfect illusion had shattered, was their eternal punishment. Isabella's fall from grace being perhaps the most devastating completed the picture. Abandoned by a wealthy husband and completely cut off from former socialite friends, drowning in a sea of staggering personal debt was her fate. Working the grueling night shift at a greasy, neon-lit diner off the interstate, wearing a stained, ill-fitting polyester uniform and a mandatory, hair-flattening net, became her life. Scrubbing congealed syrup off sticky booths, swollen feet aching relentlessly, replaced designer gowns. Choosing to build a life on lies meant living the result. Turning away from the sprawling green lawns of the estate and looking directly forward breaks through the invisible barrier separating this world from yours. Looking right at the camera, right at you, acknowledges someone out there listening is standing exactly where I stood 16 years ago. Sitting in the dark, replaying every cruel insult, every unfair comparison, and every deliberate act of sabotage. Desperately trying to figure out how to fix a dynamic that was broken long before you even realized it was a game, is a heavy burden. Listening very carefully is essential. Doing anything wrong was not the issue. Being simply cast in a role never auditioned for, by directors needing a scapegoat to hide their own glaring insecurities and moral bankruptcies, was the reality. Believing the pervasive lie society force feeds that blood is thicker than water, and honoring parents regardless of how they treat you is mandatory is a trap. Abusers, knowing this societal rule, perfectly use it as a weapon to maintain compliance. Learning the absolute truth changes everything. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who chooses to stand with you when you have nothing, and who respects you when you have everything. Cutting toxic people out of life isn't a tragedy. It's a necessary surgery for emotional survival. Walking away from the people who raised me was the healthiest, most vital decision ever made. The mind is quiet. The heart is full. Sleeping soundly every single night, completely free from the anxiety of navigating manipulative games, is the norm. Being untouchable is not just because of wealth, but because inherent, undeniable worth was finally recognized. That exact same power resides within you. Sometimes, the family needed isn't the one born into, it's the one built from the ground up. Legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you protect. If my journey resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe, and share your own experiences with building your chosen family in the comments below. We read every single one. Never let anyone convince you that you are anything less than brilliant.